Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to the webinar. It is Monday, November 20th, 2016. My name is Dr. Brad Reedy. I'm a co-founder, partner, and clinical director at Evoke Therapy Programs. I was a wilderness therapist for about 15 years, and for the last 5+ years, I've served as our clinical director. So I do supervision with our therapists and with our field staff. I also do a lot of our parent curriculum, and I wrote the book, The Journey of the Heroic Parent, based on my experiences with families in wilderness therapy. So that's a little bit about me and about who I am. This webinar is for siblings and other family members, or about siblings and other family members. So you can ask those questions from your perspective, or if you want to ask questions about the role. If you're a parent, for example, and you want to talk about or ask about the role of a sibling in this process, you're welcome to ask those kinds of questions also. And you're welcome to pass this on to your loved ones afterwards if you would like. So with that, we have some pre-submitted questions. I'm going to go to those first. If you have a question that you want to submit, please submit it at any time. Stephanie, who is moderating for me this evening, will let me know. We'll pass that question on when there's an open forum time this evening. Also, I think I mentioned this. If you're a sibling, let me know your age so that I speak to the right level. Let's start with the pre-submitted questions. With our son away in treatment, his brother at home is not investing in talking to him or getting any updates on how he is doing. Any advice on how to help support or get him to open up? I get this question quite a bit, actually. I think the complex way, the various ways that siblings respond to their siblings who get sent away to wilderness is a wide variety. You can be angry, you can be hurt, you can be relieved, you can be sad, you can be angry at your parents for the process. So what I encourage parents to do, and instead of trying to get them to open up, if you will, I encourage parents to listen, even to listen to what they're not saying, and to some degree to honor that. I think in a lot of cases, it's our need for our children to open up to us, but it might not be their need for them to open up to us. And I think that we need to give plenty of respect to that boundary, plenty of respect to that desire on our part. Now, like it is the case with your child who's at Evoke or who's been to Evoke, if the problems in their life get so severe, symptomatic, that you need to keep them safer, then you're talking about something entirely different. But not opening up and not sharing is sometimes a way of communicating that it's not safe also. That if you express anger, if you express sadness, if you express a kind of resentment that you don't want to talk to them, then you're afraid that you're going to be talked out of it, that your parents are going to try to make you feel something else. I talk about this in my book. There was an example where I was talking to my young daughter. We were on a trip together. I was actually editing the book right before it was published. And so that meant I was in a really good space because whenever I was reading and editing my book, my best thinking was always there. And she's the youngest of 4 siblings. And my wife and I took her on this trip where I would be editing, working during the day, and then we would do something as a family at night together. And at one point, my young daughter at that time, very young, said to me, "I wish I was an only child." And my response was right on the mark, like I said, because I'd been reading the book. I didn't go to what maybe the most common response that we might have as parents is, which is to talk about the love of the other siblings, the company of the other siblings, to talk about how great the other siblings were. So what I did was, I said, "Wouldn't that be great? Wouldn't it be great if it was just you?" And then I started naming all the great things, and she started naming all the great things that would happen if she were an only child in our family. And then after that, I paused, and I could tell that she was relaxed. And then she said to me, "But I'd miss them, and I like having them." And she started talking about the positives of her siblings. So I didn't need to do that. She needed to feel safe and to be allowed to feel what she feels. And so I think that's the best way to encourage opening up, is to be safe. And I was just listening to a podcast about this evening, about this idea that when people don't want to share with us their feelings, we can oftentimes consider the possibility that that's feedback to us that we're not safe, that we're not a good listener. And so by honoring their unwillingness, their lack of desire to open up, we're actually doing a good job at listening and hearing them. And you can even say something about that you're not very good at it and then walk away and end the discussion. But taking a crowbar and trying to pry open a child, or anybody for that matter, who doesn't feel safe or has feelings that are hard for them isn't going to be encouraging. It's not going to be helpful to them. They're not going to feel more safe after them. What can I do best to support my sister while she is at Evoke? There's a brother who's 15. That's a fantastic question and impressive from a 15-year-old. What I would say is this simply is learn something about what she's going through. The fact that you submitted this question, hopefully you'll be on the webinar or watching it later. I already give you credit. But I think just learning a few things, asking your parents for maybe a couple of ideas about what she's learning, like the communication webinar, for example, would be a helpful start. So you just get in touch with a little bit about what she's going through. That's the first thing. Learn a little bit about it. And we have some resources where you can do that. That's the first thing. I think second, I think with siblings, I think coming to the discussion not knowing, meaning that you don't have to get it right or get it perfect. Your brother or sister, in this case a sister, who's out in our program, she already has the message very clearly that she's not getting it right. Right? She oftentimes has a lot of shame and embarrassment about that she's the screw up in the family. And so when we, as other family members, can come into the discussion, can come into the dialogue, and can say, I don't know what to do, and I'm afraid I'm going to get it wrong, and I don't know how to be helpful, I think that's a fantastic gift to give to the person in treatment. And that leads to my third idea, which is ask questions. Ask her what you can do. Ask her what you can do to support her, what she would like from you. And then if you're willing to do what she asks, then you can give it to her. I think that's the way to kind of approach all of our relationships, right? Is ask the other person, what can I do to be supportive? What can I do to be helpful? And then if it feels okay for us to give that to them, then we do give that to them. But that really honors her again. That honors the other person. I try to do this in my marriage and with my children all the time. When they're upset, when they're struggling, I try to remember to say, what can I do to be helpful in this situation? And I think so many times we think we have to magically figure it out. And we don't have to. We just have to remember the question. So, yes, thank you very much for that question. That's fantastic. I'll say one last thing before I flip the slide. I would love it if you would ask her if there's space in her for her, if she's willing to listen to you if you have feelings about past behaviors. Many of our siblings, not all of them, write what we call an impact letter, which talks about the impact on the relationship, the impact on you of the problems, the behaviors, and ask her if she's open to that. And then if you're willing to write that, that's a great place to start. What's happening with your children, your siblings, your relatives that are out of Oak is they're learning to listen. And listening is something all of us can do better at. And I'm a trained communication expert, family therapist, and I still need to practice, and I still make mistakes with my listening. So I think that would be a nice cherry on top, if you will. I see my parents doing a lot of work and investing a lot of time and money, and my brothers stay there. What happens if he comes home and nothing changes? That's a great question, and especially from a sister who I suspect might be older, that can be challenging. And what I tell families is I want to encourage everybody in the family to assume that nobody else is going to change. That's not me trying to be negative, but at least kind of as a technique. Imagine that nobody in your family changes in this process. Then what are you going to do differently? What are you going to do about it? Because ultimately, we're the only people that we have any control over, and that's hard work to make and sustain, changes. So I think there's a healthy way of kind of letting go of your expectations about him changing, not counting on it, to the point that, by that I mean that it'll only go well if he makes and sustains changes. Hopefully, what Evoke is for families and for the children that are out here, it's not a fix. It's not the solution. It's introducing a change of a way of being in relationship to life, to yourself, and to others. And then it's like a seed that gets planted, and then it gets watered long after Evoke, and it develops. And I have students write me all the time from my career. I talked to a student from last night from 13 years ago. reach out to me to bounce some ideas off of me. We had a conversation. Um, and but what happened? What the reason I like that is because he knows the process now. He knows what it's like to ask questions. He knows what it's like to feel. He knows what it's like to struggle. He doesn't always get it right, but he draws upon his lessons as well as his experience. And so I think this is more of a turn in the road for your brother, for your family. That's what we think of it as. And we think of it as a very powerful, very magical turn in the road, but it's not the solution. It's not the destination. It's just that things get pointed in a better direction. There's a You're given a compass. You kind of know where to go, and that doesn't mean it's gonna work perfectly for you all the time. So I would say do your work, and I know that's hard for a sister of 23 because you weren't the problem. But what can you do? What are your solutions? Ask your brother again. What can you do to support him in this process? Again, attending this webinar, asking that question. Watch it. For all the siblings that are willing to, I would say any of you over the age of 14, if you're willing to watch the webinar on healthy communication, that'll create a bridge between you and your sibling for the way that he or she is learning to talk and learning to listen here at Evoke. That would be, I think, a very basic thing that you could do that would help share a language. But importantly, just like with your parents, not allowing yourself to be held hostage by whether or not they change. Not that it won't affect you, because it will, but not being held hostage by that. I tell the children in the field the same thing about you all. I say the best way to prepare for this is prepare for your parents not to change, for your brothers and sisters not to change for that matter. And then what are you going to do? Now, we hope everybody, of course, makes some changes and improves and has some insights and some new tools. We know that happens. But when we start to think about what we can control, which is us, and start to spend less time trying to control something that we can't control, which is everybody else, we have less anxiety, less depression, more serenity. So that's my thought about that. With the weather changing, how do you keep the students safe and warm? Concerned grandparents. First of all, we do have a webinar, and Stephanie, maybe you can post it here to the families. We do have a webinar on the winter where I go over protocols and what it's like to have your child in the winter, out in the wilderness, and during the holidays. So that's something you can spend a lot of time looking at, and Stephanie will post the link here in a moment at the bottom of your screen. In addition to that, we have safety protocols and weather protocols. We have fantastic gear. Much of the time is spent keeping them safe and dry. There's a lot of work and energy that goes into keeping their hands and feet dry and safe and warm. You just can't take it for granted. It's not that it's cold out there or they're cold out there. It is cold out there, but it's that they have to work at it. They have to have a fire, or they have to be in their sleeping bag, or they have to be geared up hiking. They have to be doing something about it. You can't take anything for granted. But like I said, we find it to be a much more effective program in the winter oftentimes than even in the summer because it's so intense in this way. The lessons are inherent in the daily activities. Sometimes new staff come to me and they say, Brad, we can't do all the therapy we want to do in the wintertime because of the shorter days and because the weather is more severe. And my response is that is the therapy. That is where you do the teaching and the joining and the connecting. So it's by protocols that we have around weather. It's about the gear that we have that is professional gear, top of the line wilderness gear. And then it's about creating intention and realizing that that's what a lot of the wintertime is. It's about making sure that everything's running well in those health and safety ways. And then in those tasks comes the lesson, comes the relationship, comes the wisdom, right? It's natural and logical consequences. It's learning to be taught. If a student doesn't want to cooperate or doesn't want to listen, they're going to struggle more. We're not going to allow them to be unsafe, but they're going to struggle more with it. And so it's like being on a farm. The lesson of what you reap is what you sow, you don't have to teach that. That just gets taught by what you do. But most American families don't have that kind of life, and so we have to learn how to teach that in other ways. And wilderness therapy, especially in the winter, teaches hard work, teaches easy, hard, hard, easy, meaning they either do the easy thing now and then you have to do the hard thing later. You do the hard thing now so you can do the easy thing later. It teaches natural consequences for listening and working and planning. You can't take it for granted. And you actually become and develop more gratitude in this environment than we do when we are allowed to, because of the nature of things, take things for granted. All right. I'm happy to take any live questions that have come in. How do we communicate with them? Through letters? Are there times that we can have phone calls? It's all up to the therapist. We typically like to start off with the parents. This is the kind of standard. We start off with the parents with letters and phone calls. But most evoke therapists will introduce siblings into the equation, especially if a sibling wants to communicate. If you want to write that letter that I described earlier, the impact letter, ask your parents about that. And then oftentimes we don't do sibling phone calls. It's rare we do them. We kind of start off small and concentrated and then expand as we go. So you might be brought into it a little bit later, but I would say the impact letter can happen oftentimes very soon, sometimes right at the first part of the program, and then more letters and possibly a phone call later on. So there's a possibility, but it's all individually decided by the therapist based on what they think is going to be most helpful in the process. And if you're involved and if you're doing some of the stuff, there's even a webinar on phone calls that you can watch ahead of time. I don't want to give you too many assignments, but there is a webinar on phone calls. But that communication webinar that I talked about, that's a good place to start for sure, so that when you do communicate through letters or on phone calls or when he gets home, that you kind of have that bridge, you have that common, that shared language that we have taught them here at Evoke. A question from a sister, 12-year-old. What happens when my sister comes home later after school? Well, getting back into the family, she's going to have a lot of new skills. She's going to have a lot more awareness. Like I said, the more that you and your family can do to kind of learn what she's learning, the more, the easier it will be for her to connect to you. But by that time, after school, after wilderness and a school, she's going to have the tools that she needs to, and it's not going to go perfect. My son, when he was 14, was in wilderness, and then he went to a therapeutic school, and then he came home. It wasn't perfect after that. We didn't have no problems after that, but we did have a foundation. This is something I want to say to all of you that's very important. I've said this many times, but not to the siblings in a while. One of the most important things for siblings to know, as well as families, is that we don't think in black and white ways. That means it's not all good or all bad. When parents identify themselves as having had a successful therapeutic experience, this is 2 years after treatment, one of the things that they all say, or they say mostly in that category, one of the things that they say is that when they learned not to think in these extreme black and white ways, all good or all bad, not to say things like, we're back at square one, or we're back to zero, or we're back the way it was. Your sister can never forget this stuff. It's going to change her, right? She'll carry it with her whole life. I can't tell you how many children have written college essays based on their wilderness experience. It's countless. It makes an impact on them. But if the pressure is to be perfect, if the pressure is if you make a mistake or you relapse with an old behavior, then you're considered a failure. That's too much pressure for any of us. So try to look at it as a lot more gray. Some things will be different. Some things will be the same. There'll be mistakes, but there'll be more tools for everybody. And then you can work through it. You can build on those mistakes. You can build by learning, by growing, by getting through them. So that's important. And if this goes perfectly well, in our experience and in my vision, if this goes perfectly well, everybody in the family will be changed by it. Everybody will be educated by it. Everybody will have a new way of communicating, a new way of looking at each other and listening to each other. And then that's wonderful. Even for those of you who weren't the problem, weren't the ones getting in trouble, that were just on the sidelines and maybe even getting hurt by it, it still can change you in the process too. Many of my families, the majority of my families, say that that's the case. So thank you for that question. What are common steps for those who are coming out of the program? My brother is 18. Um, Typically, more common than not is they'll go to, especially at that age, a therapeutic setting, maybe a halfway house is not the common language today, but they call it a transitional living oftentimes. So the therapist will work with your parents to make an assessment about what kind of support they need after evoke, and then they'll get your brother's wants and desires and wish list. Your parents will come up with a few choices that will, along with an educational consultant, somebody that they're working with at home, the therapist at Evoke, and they'll present your brother with a few choices they find acceptable, and then your brother will get to choose it. But typically, going straight from our program to home with only a therapist 1 hour a week, that's usually not enough. But the therapist will make that determination, and then there's a whole gamut, there's a whole arena, a whole list of programs and types of programs that will be recommended based on the level of support that he needs, and then he'll eventually choose that. But with 18-year-olds and older, they have a lot of say in it. They have a lot to ask. This needs to be something they're invested in. They need to take ownership of it. So they get very involved in the process along the way. And then your parents get to decide what they're willing to support. Do you find involvement of the siblings beneficial? Father with two siblings on the webinar. Um, yes. Yes, I do. I'll tell you where. Impact letters. I would say it's not always the case, of course, but it happens a lot that the letters from the siblings, the um, impact letters that siblings write, and they don't have to write one as detailed as the parent does, but if they'll write a letter like that about their feelings and their thoughts and how they were impacted by the stuff that was going on in the family, that it has more impact on the child often than do the parent impact letters. So that's one way. And then beginning to have a dialogue. Sometimes I even had siblings come out to the field for an overnight. Now that was a very, very rare exception. But sometimes if they were willing to do more work, like learn a little bit and go to family therapy and learn about the communication that we teach, if they're willing to do more like that, it's such a gift for them to give to their brothers or sisters out there in the field, in the wilderness. It's so wonderful. It shows great courage. It shows a willingness to be vulnerable and to open up, which the child in the field is being asked to do in a very, very significant way. Um, and then it depends upon the amount. If the siblings don't want to do a lot of work or just aren't in a place to do a lot of work, um, sometimes involving them during the Evoke program can be challenging because we spend so much time trying to catch the siblings up to speed that we lose time to focus on the child. So in our program, we don't do a lot of visits with them in the middle of the program or at the end of the program. That would be, again, those would be exceptions to the rule. By and large, we wouldn't have them come because it's such a short-term program, and to involve them in that, especially if they haven't been doing their work, can be challenging. But again, those things can happen if the brother or the sister at home is willing to do a little bit of studying, a little bit of work, and get up to speed, and the therapist thinks it's appropriate. I think the thing I would want to say about siblings is this, because I think I feel for the siblings, especially for the ones that are willing to come on and watch this webinar tonight. I remember when my son was in Willis, I remember how affected his sisters were by that, how much they missed him during that process. Um, it was very sad for them. But what I would say is we do start off with a small focus. There are a lot of wonderful things in this child's life that's at Evoke that we don't give them access to. They're not reading a lot of literature. They're reading therapeutic books, but they're not reading a lot of great literature, just as an example. They're not having contact with other supportive loved ones like grandparents or siblings as often. Those are, again, exceptions to the rule. That doesn't mean those things aren't positive. We just want to concentrate it to the primary relationships. What I would say to this father is if your other children are willing to come to family therapy and start that process, that can be absolutely supportive coming out of wilderness. And some children don't want to or will resist it greatly. And some parents will draw the line and say, this is a family thing, we're doing it, because there are things you're going to do as a family. Um, but if they're willing to do a little bit of that work, if they're willing to show up and be students, if they're willing to ask their brother or sister how they can support them, I think they can be a very positive impact on them. And again, it's case by case, and I don't want to speak for your child's therapist in the woods, but by and large, we don't have a lot of sibling involvement for visits or phone calls, but there are exceptions where, and I made many exceptions over the years in my own caseload. But man, if they're willing to write some letters, if they're willing to learn about a couple of these things and show it, I'm sure everybody, including the child and the therapist, would be impressed by that. What do you think of some of the ways to overcome feelings of anger toward my sister in the program? Sister 20 with a sister 17 in the program. I think, first of all, your anger needs to be validated, to be honest. So I would slow down and I would take, if you were my client, if I were talking to you one-on-one, I would spend a lot of time listening to your anger and validating it and understanding it. Ideally, your sister in the program will also be willing to listen to it and validate it. That's what she's learning to do now. So that's the best way that I know to get over anger, is to have it be validated and listened to. And then kind of a deeper track to go on with that is, our anger just is our hurt, our fear, our sadness, our embarrassments, big brother, right? It's the one that protects us. Anger protects us from those other feelings. So when we know that, then we know that gosh, it's hard to be afraid and hurt and vulnerable, scared, worried, those things. So anger protects us from those feelings, and then that can be helpful to the process. In our program, we teach commonly that anger is always a secondary emotion. It always covers up another emotion. But I don't. That doesn't mean I disregard it or don't want to listen to it. It just means that's the doorway in. That's the protector. There's a couple of really cool books. In fact, I've never thought of this on a sibling webinar before, but if you're willing to, and I have webinars on them too, but they're really easy books to read, and 12 years old and up can read them. The Knight in Rusty Armor and The Letters of Juliet to the Knight in Rusty Armor. If you want to read those books, those are fantastic books to kind of talk about the relationship between what we call the identified patient, which is the sibling that's in the wilderness, and the family members, which in this case, in these stories, is the wife of the knight, and kind of what she goes through and what she learns in the process. Those can also be helpful. But in fact, for you at your age, reading the Letters of Juliet, reading the Knight in Rusty Armor first, and then reading the Letters of Juliet to the Knight in Rusty Armor are a fantastic way to kind of understand what our anger does for us, how it protects us, and how we can move through it or have it move through us. But I would listen to it and honor it first. It's well earned, I'm sure. It is so difficult to communicate when a child won't write even a little. It is. I talk about this in my book a little bit. I was talking to a father this weekend about when children don't open up to us. We have to find ways to listen to that. And again, like I said a few moments ago, it might be their need to stay closed for a little while. It might be their need not to share because of what often happens. I was listening to this, like I said, I was listening to this podcast just before I got on the webinar, and it was talking about business and culture and having healthy dynamics in our workplace by one of my friends. I was listening to his interview, and he was saying, when you ask your employees to give you feedback, he said the first response in many cases is nobody wants to give you any feedback, and the feedback for that is that you're not safe and approachable. And so what I talk about in that section of my book where I talk about listening to the child who doesn't want to open up is honor the defense, honor the wall that they've built. They built it for a reason. Don't tear it down, and don't use your x-ray vision to look through it. Understand that it's deserved, and understand you are part of the reason they built that, right? And when you honor the wall, when you honor the defense, then they're going to know you're safe. So, and then you can reward, I call it rewarding, I didn't invent this phrase, it's behavioral terms, but in this context, you reward successive approximations. And what that fancy language means is you reward little things. You do, I call it the grocery store lecture, where you say one or two sentences and then you stop the discussion. Or when somebody tells you they don't want to talk to you, you walk away, right? so that every discussion your child learns, every discussion isn't going to devolve into a lecture where you're talking for 30 minutes. Isn't going to deteriorate into this discussion where they're just being talked at, right? Or asked a million questions. So end conversations early. Keep lectures to 2 or 3 sentences. Um, Reward small baby steps and honor the defense. Honor the wall. Understand the wall. Let the wall, for a moment, for a time, for some time, let the wall be enough. Meaning that understand why they built it and how it protects them and from whom and from what. That's what we try to do as therapists is honor the wall, honor the wall that they built, the defense that they built. Does having two siblings enroll? It's doing that thing again, Stephanie. Does having two siblings enrolled in a voc at the same time but in different groups prove to be more effective knowing that each other is enrolled and involved, ages 17 and 19? Well, it's been some of my favorite work in our program over the years. So I'm a huge fan of it because you get two people involved in this amazing process with this amazing life changing language and awareness and insight. And you introduce that into a family and changes are magnificent. And we've had children come together for a day or 2 days or some time together. I've had children go into each other's groups. I've had one child start off really hot and one start off really cold, and then I've had them flip flop. All kinds of fascinating family dynamics. So yeah, I mean, if we could, we would have all of us get into it, right? Most of our students and clients would say and do say, everybody should have to do this. This should be just a rite of passage in high school. Because for those of you who don't know, this is just the safest, most supportive, clinical, meaning therapeutic, experience in the woods. It's the safest time that they'll ever be in their life emotionally. The safest place they'll ever be in their life. The most supportive place that they'll ever be in their life. It's nurturing. It's taking time to listen to them. I was talking to some friends recently, and she said she had this fantasy that she got in a car accident, not such a bad car accident that she was really hurt, but just hurt enough that she had to stay in the hospital so people could take care of her. And while it's not like that, it is a place where you get to take care of yourself and you get taken care of. And when you learn in our program to kind of go with that, to embrace that, to accept that, it becomes easier than home by far. And for many of them, this will be the most successful time that they'll have in their adolescence or young adulthood. It's harder outside. It's harder at home. It's harder at college. It's harder at high school. It's harder in all those places than it is at Evoke. So, the downside is not a big downside. It's challenging physically, right? There's work. There's conflict that you have to resolve and practice, right? You get assignments. There's those things for sure. But it's also all of those other things that I just mentioned. So I love it. It's been some of my very favorite interventions have been working with siblings that were in the field at the same time. And one was in my group and one was in somebody else's group, and we got to do different things with the family and with the children. And the parents learned so much too because they saw how these principles apply to two different people with different personalities and different specific problems. And I think that's a better way to learn, right? If you learn a certain skill, a certain concept, and you have to apply it to different situations, you learn it better. So I'm just slightly enthusiastic about that. From family friends, my family has been told that sometimes in these types of programs, youth will learn more and how to get away with these behaviors, about behaviors that partly led to their placement in the program. How does Evoke work to counteract this? From Sister 21 and brother in the program 18. Good question. Let me get a sip of water and I'll tell you. There is something that happens in treatment where people are imitating each other, right? And they do get exposed to some other issues that they don't have and other drugs that they don't do and so forth. The way that we manage this in our program is the students don't talk to each other outside of earshot. What that means is that's just a fancy way of saying that every conversation that they're having with each other has to be within a staff's ability to hear that discussion. Not that we're eavesdropping on every conversation, but it doesn't leave a lot of room for negative self-talk. So it's supervised. High schools and colleges have all of that stuff, and it's all unsupervised. Private schools, non-therapeutic private schools, have all of that stuff, and it's all unsupervised. And people are getting into these problems everywhere. If a child doesn't move along therapeutically as much as he should, he's going to tell his parents that, because what's he going to want to do? He's going to want to tell them, or she's going to want to tell them, it's your fault. I'm going to punish you emotionally for having sent me to Evoke or programs like Evoke. I'm going to make you regret it. I'm going to make that the problem, right? So it's also just a form of manipulation in another way. But the internet, social media, high school, college, they're getting exposure to all that stuff, and they're getting it without supervision, without clinical or therapeutic intervention. And out here, all of that stuff happens. I would love to take peer groups from home and put them in the same group and then supervise the dynamics and their peer pressure and the modeling and all of that. That would be fantastic, right? So I think oftentimes it's manipulation. It's what people tell. It's what children tell their parents to try to make their parents regret and try to make their parents responsible for the mistakes that they might be making later in their life. That's my experience. The healthy ones get exposed to it and tell us that they heard worse at home and that it didn't matter. It didn't matter because they wanted to get better eventually. From 12-year-old sister with a 16-year-old sister in the program. How can you write letters when some things I will say will make her homesick? That's a great question and very sensitive of you to ask. It's okay that she's homesick. We want her to miss you. And we want her to come back to you as soon as she's ready. And we want you to be with her as soon as she's ready, as soon as you're all ready. What we do at our program is we teach children how to feel. Everything. See, when I first became a therapist, I thought I was learning, I thought my job was to help people feel happy. And what I realized was my job is to help people feel everything. And I spend as much of my time helping people feel their sadness, maybe more time feeling their sadness than I do helping them feel their happiness. That comes easy for them. So being homesick just means that she loves you. And you can't have loving you without homesickness sometimes and missing you. So I think it's okay for her to feel it and for her to miss you and for you to miss her. And we want that. You know, that's when I sent my son to the wilderness when he was 14. It was Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, and his birthday. He was out in the wilderness for all those times. And it was in some ways the worst time for him to be there, but it wasn't working at home for any of us. So I wanted to miss him and I wanted to work for it. And what I always say is, you know, it doesn't matter. Thanksgiving 2016 isn't what we're investing in right now. We're investing in 2017, 18, 19, and so on. So that she'll have a good life. That she might have a good family, a good relationship, her own children, and a great relationship with you for the rest of her life. So she's going to feel homesick because she loves you and misses you. And we want that to be part of what helps her to want to be better so that she can have a better relationship with you and your parents. So it's okay. It really is okay if she feels it. If you want and you send me your email address, I'll send you a t-shirt, an Evoke t-shirt. You can take a picture and send it to her. Tell her you miss her. What is the best way to communicate sympathy and support to my sister without making her feel pitied? I think empathy. Probably the best way is to find common ways that you feel with her. You know, I'll tell you the story. When I was younger in my career, before I worked in wilderness, I worked with criminals, people that were coming out of the criminal justice system and had committed violent crimes on other people, had been really bad to other people. And I remember thinking when I first got this job, I remember thinking, oh, this is going to be the easiest job in the world because I'm so much better than these guys. That's what I thought. I really thought it. Almost that conscious. And then after my first night, I was terrified. Because after my first night, although I had never done any of the things that these men had done that got them in trouble, I could identify with the feeling of insecurity and the feeling vulnerable and the feeling lonely and the not wanting to feel pain and grief in my life. And so the best way to do that is to find commonalities, to find ways, when children sit next to each other in our groups out there, I can't tell you how many times they'll turn to each other and say, I didn't do that. I never stole that from my grandmother like you did. Or I never said that to my parent like you did. Or I didn't do, I didn't drink, or I didn't do this here. But let me tell you how I'm the same. So I always talk about this with the groups. Mental health, one measure of mental health, one sign of mental health is when you can see the similarities between yourself and others, not the differences. The differences are a lot easier to see. And it doesn't mean that you say that it's okay what they did. It doesn't mean that you're excusing it. It just means that you show some connection. So that's the best way you can do it, is find some core feelings, find some core similarity. I always tell parents, don't give your children lectures about peer pressure. Talk to them about how sometimes you worry about what people think about you still. Right? We give all these lectures about peer pressure, and none of us are immune to worrying about what somebody else thinks of us. Many of us are worried about, as parents, about what people are going to judge us for when we have our children in the program. That's the same as peer pressure, right? So find ways to connect, find ways to see similarities would be my suggestion, to share that empathy without pitying her. My biggest concern right now is that our son is so good at playing the part, he knows how to say what folks want to hear. How do the counselors work with that? Can they spot that non-genuine behavior? That non-genuine behavior. That's all we do. That's all we do. Most of the students in our program are bright. Most of the students in our program are therapeutically savvy. They used to say in my group, because I always got these really bright, manipulative, wonderful young adolescent boys. And the staff would come to my group and they would say, Brad, your group is the easiest group because everybody does everything that you say, you tell them to do. And after being in my group for 2 or 3 weeks, 2 or 3 shifts, those same staff would often come to me and say, your group is the hardest group because everybody does exactly what you say. So yeah, we're aware of that. That happens all the time. But what you do is you slow down. I don't care what you say. I just watch what you do. I watch, I remember I used to sit down and they would want to start showing me their assignments and I would just sit there. We would all just sit down and say, I don't want to talk about those right now. And they would be upset. So we get unimpressed by the checking off the box, by doing it right. And so many of my students would be so frustrated after a while because they were doing it right. And I wasn't over the moon about it. I wasn't impressed with it. Because therapy isn't good and bad. Therapy isn't doing it right. Therapy is healing. It's deep. It's vulnerable. When you're making progress as a client, you don't sell anybody anything. You don't sell anybody on your progress. You don't sell anybody on how well you're going to do after. You don't sell anybody on how well you're doing, period. You talk about the struggle. You talk about the mistake you made. So when somebody presents well, all of us, all of our counselors, all of our field staff are trained to know something's missing in that. And by the way, I'm not looking for you to be good. But you keep trying to be better in that way. And I'm just looking for you to be real. I'd rather you come to the session and talk about the one thing that you struggle with this week more than the 6 things that you did well. Not that I won't pay attention to those and acknowledge those, but you're not struggling with those. I want to talk about that one time when you blew up at your friend, or when you got caught, burying your food because you didn't want to clean it up, or whatever it is. And they'll be like, wait a second, I did 10 things well, and that one thing I said, that was great, but I'm not. You're not in trouble. If your knee, if I'm a doctor and you came to me and your ACL was blown on your left knee, I'm not going to spend any time on your right knee. I'm not going to spend any time on how great your biceps are, how healthy your stomach and liver are. I'm not going to talk about that or how great your skincare is. I'm going to talk about your knee the whole time. Not because so in therapy, it's not shame or stigma or negativity, but I'm a doctor of the psyche, and I go to the part that's sick. I use the part that's strong to help the part that's sick, right? But I'm going to talk about the hurt, the woundedness. I'm going to let the symptom, if you will, kind of teach me where to find it, and I'm going to learn about it, and then I'm going to help you to heal it. So it's what we do. What does a typical day look like for our siblings? At Evoke, what time do they get up and go to bed? Do they work in a group all day? Do they have programs, discussions during the day? Let me see if I can pull this up. I think I have a sample day. I might have a sample day here. Yep. It's an old slide, but I have it. And it's sideways. Can I rotate that? I can't rotate that, can I? We got to figure out how to rotate that. Oh well, you can read sideways along with me. That's a typical day on the left column or the bottom column, the way this slide is. They wake up in the morning, they have some discussion, orientation about what the day or the morning is going to look like. They have breakfast, and they clean up their fire pit. We call it crushing coals. They have a morning group. They might hike, stop for lunch on the way. They have personal time every day where they're working on assignments that their therapist give them or letters home or other things like that. They hike again. They get to the campsite in the evening. They have chores. They set up camp. They have chores that rotate every day. They set up camp. They have dinner preparation and eat. Then they have a formal group therapy at night, and then they go to bed. Sometimes we play games, sing a song at night. If the group does everything, we'll sit around and have hot chocolate or do something like that. Tell stories, maybe even read a book together. Then throughout the day, they'll do things like we call them standing groups. So they have 2 or 3 formal groups a day, but then they have any number of small 5-minute, 10-minute groups where somebody's getting in an argument or somebody's having a really bad day or somebody's bugging somebody else, and we'll talk about that. We call those standing groups. 2 days a week they have layover days. So that is where we don't hike and we do a lot of laundry. The food comes out. We clean out the old pack. We get all the food divided. Um, they're working on letters and reading because it's hard to do that throughout the week with as much personal time as they get. They get new laundry. They take showers twice a week. Um, then they have basically 2 kinds of curriculum. They have emotional curriculum, and then they have hard skills like building a shelter, tying a knot, busting a fire. Emotional curriculum is like not swearing at each other, learning to listen, learning the communication skills, learning to share and develop insight. There's also like academic work as part of their assignment, and then there's therapists that add assignments to the core curriculum that they'll have. Once or twice during the program, they go on solos. So for 2 or 3 days, they're by themselves. Well, the staff come and check on them, but they're by themselves and they don't talk to anybody else. There's chores every day, and then this comment: everything becomes therapy. It's therapy all day long. Group sizes are anywhere from 6 to 10 students typically, and then you have 3 to 4 staff, and then a therapist who comes in for 2 days a week to do the sessions. So they're camping, but within that day, within all those things, this is just like a family life. There's conflict, there's sadness, there's struggles, there's frustration. There's all of that comes up, and so you just work with all of it. It's why, like I said, the grocery store lecture works, where you go grocery shopping with your kid and you talk to them about a deep thing for 30 seconds, not for 30 minutes. In this way, we're doing all this stuff, and the talk just kind of happens alongside of it all day long. And then they really do create the same kinds of relationships that they had at home. And then we don't have to rely on so often parents will say to us, even after 1 week, they'll say, gosh, you get my child. That's because this isn't a hospital, right? Where they're going from class to class and having a class on depression, a class on drugs, a class on anxiety. and then a group therapy session. This is life. And then it's within that context of life that all these things happen. Then they have individual sessions with the staff twice a week and with the therapist once a week too. In response to the question about supervised conversation, what do the staff at Evoke do if they hear these conversations? They'll talk about it. They'll talk about what they're hearing. They'll have a discussion. We don't shut down all negative behavior immediately because we want to learn from it. So they might say, "Tell me about that." Like you're. Sometimes they'll shut it down, and sometimes they'll just talk about it. Saying, this is the fifth time this week that you've been talking about some inappropriate stuff in this area or whatever it is. Tell me more about that. Like, what's going on? What does that do for you? Right? So we use it as therapy to see what's going on. The staff, the students bring it to us sometimes too. They'll talk about it. They'll say, "I don't want to hear about that stuff," or "I'm past that," or they'll call each other out on it and say, "Susie or Billy, like this is nonsense." So they'll kind of challenge each other, and they can do that well. So we use it for therapy. We use it to find out this is what happens when they're not trying to impress the therapist or the parent by telling them what they think they want to hear. And so that's some of the most important stuff that we use. And we train our staff, don't always shut it down. Sometimes let it run out a little bit so you can learn from it. It seems that angry outbursts towards parents usually occur when confronted with facts or inconsistencies in the used logic. How do we get beyond the rusty armor? Well, in the book, the rusty armor is you cry. You learn to feel the deeper feelings. That's how you get behind it. But the angry outbursts and there's a webinar that I did called them. In fact, I just did a podcast for it yesterday. I'm recording some of the old webinars and putting them on our new podcast platform called "The Myth of Being Right." And there's a chapter in my book on the myth of being right, where the webinar came from. It's a different way of doing this. It's not about who's right or wrong, right? And it's not debating or arguing. So there's a different kind of way of being in a relationship that this way is a problem on both sides, right? You don't have to be right. You don't have to prove anything. You just get to feel it. You get to hold your boundary. It's like when a dad asked me for an article on marijuana use for his son. And I said, "Why do you want it?" He said, "Well, I just want to, she's 24, he's living in my basement. I want to show it to him." And I said, "Yeah, he'll just come back with another article that debates it. Or he'll come up with some facts from the other side." And I said, "Why don't you just tell your son that you're not comfortable him doing that anymore?" And the dad said to me, "You mean I can do that?" So we change the way that we talk to each other. And we learn about setting boundaries in a way that we didn't before. And we do less to provoke the angry outbursts. And they develop skills to deal with feelings and to communicate more assertively. So it's a systemic change. And the knight gets rid of his rusty armor by crying. Can you explain more what solos are like? Yeah, they have to be recommended by the therapist. We have to trust them. So oftentimes they don't do it if they're new in the program. So the whole group usually goes on them. So you go and find a spot, usually in a wooded area where they can't see each other, and you pick out a spot that's like 30 paces by 30 paces. You kind of mark it off for them, kind of say, those trees, that tree, and here. And then they sit there for 2 or 3 days. Sometimes we don't even give them any writing or reading material. We ask them to stay awake all day long during the daylight. We come around and check on them several times a day. They have a little cairn of rocks. It's a little stack of rocks where they'll leave notes. We don't really even talk to them unless it's an emergency. And they talk about how they might need more of this or more of that. So we make sure that they're safe. We make sure that they're hydrated. We make sure that they're warm. But they just spend time with themselves and see how they like the company. And then sometimes we give them a specific assignment, a themed assignment, a letter assignment, a reading assignment. So part of it, there's no assignment. Part of it, there's some focus or theme to the solo that we have them look at. And then they come back with a wealth of thoughts and feelings and ideas because they were quiet. Someone called it noble silence, right? Where they actually spent time with themselves. And I know for a lot of us who are living in the world, the front country we call it, we're rarely sitting in our own silence. Our cell phones, our smartphones, our social media, our media, everything is so fast and so full and so immediate. Many of us, you drive around the roads, people texting, calling on their phones. People are actually not wanting to spend time by themselves in their car while they're driving, so they're willing to risk people's lives, their own lives, by texting and looking at social media or emails or whatever. That's how afraid we are just to be with ourselves. So it's kind of like a meditation or a mindfulness that we encourage, and that goes on for 48 to 72 hours. And we introduce them to it by a ceremony that we create, and then we take them off as solo by a ceremony. And then we'll often cook for them at the end, or have a special dinner for them at the end, and then we'll have a group talking about it. And then if it's a theme solo, then we'll process. Like sometimes it's a mask assignment where they'll all draw their mask, the things they show to the world, and the things that are behind it, things like that would be a theme, and then we would share that assignment from the solo. I can do one more question, Stephanie. My sibling is leaving Evoke soon. How does Evoke transition the kids to leaving the wilderness? The transition really starts right from the beginning with your parents on the phone call, with the parent education we do with them, with these webinars, with the assignments, with the weekly phone calls, with the if they had a mentor, every parent is offered a mentor if they want one. So it really does start from there. We do think of this as a family intervention. And then midway through the program, some way through the program, they have phone calls. They, of course, have letters all the way throughout. And then we make recommendations about what level of support the child needs afterwards. And that support is also there for the family. Are they going to come home? Are they going to go to a therapeutic school or program? Are they going to go to some kind of transitional program that's kind of half home and half independent living, but half therapeutic? So the therapist will make an assessment and then recommendation to your parent. And then if the child is an adolescent, he or she may or may not have more say in it. If they're an adult, they'll have a lot more say in it. And then we make that transition and we create a plan for that. So it's kind of a gradual process that starts really from the first week, when we start thinking about what's working with your brother or sister, what's not working, what do they like, what are they responding to, what are their issues, what interventions do they seem to respond well to, what don't they respond well to? Is it the group, the peer group? Is it the therapy sessions? Is it being outdoors and being in an experiential environment like this? Is it a certain approach? Do they have drug and alcohol problems? Are they dealing with depression or anxiety? So we start to piece together this picture that then informs us about the recommendation that then your parents choose to implement. More clients and students than not don't go home. Most of them go away to a therapeutic school or program, as I've discussed. And if they're over 18, even if they do well, oftentimes we think of this as a better launching point for them is to go to a transitional living, for example. So, well, thank you so very much for all your questions tonight, and thank you for joining us. I hope it was helpful. I just run through a few slides before I wrap up and tell you about tomorrow night's webinar. If you want to attend one of our intensives workshops, we also have family workshops and family intensives. The next two that we have scheduled here are for any adult. That's if you want to do deeper work. I run those, 6 people. I'll let you know about the workshops as soon as we get them up. There are emails if you need to know. We ask all parents to go to 6 of these sessions, these 12-step support groups, while their children are with us. So go to 6 of one kind, any combination of these: Al-Anon, CODA, Families Anonymous, Nar-Anon, or Al-Anon, Alateen. Alateen is for teenagers who have addicts in their family. But it's not just for addiction. It's for really anybody who is in your life that you love and care about and is self-sabotaging, is being unhealthy. And how do you be in relationship to that person in a healthy way? I've also put NAMI.org, which you can look up, and there are classes, free classes, and resources all throughout the country you can look up. Parent support groups will be in Atlanta later this week. See some of you there. Toronto in a couple weeks. I need to change the New York City one. I'm not sure when the January one is. Oh, no, that's right. December 14th. I was thinking that we were moving into January. I apologize. Social media, follow us on, you can subscribe to the podcast or use the SoundCloud app if you have an Android device. Follow us on Twitter or Instagram at Evoke Therapy. Follow us on Facebook. You can go to the Second Nature Alumni Foundation on Facebook page too, and connect with other families giving back to people who can't afford treatment. Go to our blog to look at blogs from our team. Pursuits is high adventure, fun trips, very therapy light. Camping, snowshoeing, canyoneering, river rafting, mountain biking, fly fishing, international trips. My book is available on paperback or on audio version. You can go to the Parent Alumni Foundation book page to buy The Journey of the Heroic Parent or any of the other books that are recommended by our therapists. And then part of the proceeds goes to the charity to help people who can't afford therapy. The next webinar will be tomorrow evening, Tuesday, November 29th at 7 p.m. Mountain Time. And that will be on self-sabotage. So look forward to that. Again, thank you for joining me tonight. Thank you, siblings, for coming out and family members for coming out. I hope this is helpful. Have a great evening. Take care, and I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.